He was broadcasting live, as usual, but what he saw at the scene of the tragedy broke him forever. Write in the comments where you're watching us from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The morning sun filtered softly through the blinds of the modest two-story home on South Langley Avenue, casting warm strips of light across the worn wooden floors of the James family kitchen. The smell of strong coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of cinnamon from the toast browning quietly in the toaster. Malik James, 43, moved with a sense of controlled energy as he filled his travel mug, checked the time on his smartwatch, and glanced out the window at the awakening city beyond. The day had barely begun, and already his thoughts were racing ahead to the stories waiting to be told. Dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer over a crisp white shirt, Malik had the appearance of someone who took pride in every detail. A veteran journalist for CBS Chicago News, he had earned his reputation through years of relentless work, often diving into stories others hesitated to touch. He wasn't flashy or loud. He didn't need to be. His calm, firm voice carried weight, and his integrity had become his brand. People trusted him. His name, his face, his tone, these were things viewers associated with truth in a city where truth was often in short supply. Down the hallway, his son stirred. 16-year-old Jaden James shuffled into the kitchen, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He wore a gray hoodie and jeans, his backpack slung lazily over one shoulder. He paused by the fridge, grabbing an orange juice box, then slumped into the seat across from his father. "You're up early," Malik said, without looking up from his tablet, where headlines flashed across the screen. "Big project," Jaden mumbled, his voice gravelly with sleep. Malik nodded, still scanning the news. He knew Jaden had been spending more time with his friends from school, talking about video journalism and youth investigation collectives, a concept Malik half understood and half dreaded. Jaden had always shown signs of being cut from the same cloth, analytical, curious, observant. But Malik had hoped his son would pursue a safer path, maybe engineering, law, something predictable. "Project for which class?" Jaden hesitated, then shrugged. "Civics, sort of. You know how Mr. Levine is." Malik finally looked up. "Jaden." "I'm being safe," his son said quickly, avoiding his father's gaze. "We're not doing anything stupid." Malik sighed and closed the tablet. He wanted to push further, but decided against it. Their relationship was still finding balance after everything they'd been through. After the cancer, after losing Lena, after navigating grief with nothing but silence and mismatched routines. There were scars neither of them knew how to speak about, and some mornings it was better to let the air stay calm. Jaden stood and slung his backpack over both shoulders. "I'll see you later." "You sure you don't want to ride?" "Nah, I'm meeting the guys a few blocks down." Malik watched him leave, the door closing behind him with a soft click. He stood in the silence for a moment, then picked up the plate of untouched toast and scraped it into the sink. Something about the exchange unsettled him. Not the words, but the way Jaden had looked past him, as if holding a secret behind his tired eyes. But Malik had a show to prepare. He couldn't afford to spiral into parental paranoia. Not again. At the CBS studio on West Washington Boulevard, the newsroom buzzed with its usual morning rhythm. Desks hummed with conversations, screens blinked with incoming feeds, and producers moved with urgency between edit bays and control rooms. Malik greeted colleagues with nods, his coffee steaming in hand, his face unreadable as always. Inside his corner office, Malik reviewed the script for the morning segment. It was a powerful piece, an investigation into the misappropriation of city funds meant for public housing. Malik had spent weeks on it, tracking financial records, interviewing whistleblowers, confronting bureaucrats. It was the kind of journalism he believed in, the kind that made enemies. As cameras rolled at 9 a.m., Malik sat straight at the news desk, his voice steady and deliberate. "Good morning, Chicago. Today we bring you a special report on how promises made to our city's most vulnerable are being buried under red tape and political posturing." The segment struck a chord. Online chatter erupted. Social media lit up with praise and outrage. Local officials were already on defense. Malik didn't care about the noise. He cared that the story was out, that it might spark change. He had done his part. But as the broadcast ended and the anchor lights dimmed, a producer hurried toward him. "There's been a fire," she said. "Industrial zone, south side. It's big. Smoke's visible from the expressway." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Hazmat?" "Possibly. But here's the twist. There's talk of people inside. Teenagers. Unconfirmed, but it's spreading fast." He didn't hesitate. "I'll take it." The crew moved quickly. Malik grabbed his gear, pulled on a windbreaker with the CBS logo, and met his cameraman, Isaiah, and audio tech, Rosa, by the news van. Traffic was thick as usual, but the sirens blaring in the distance cut through the usual city drone like a warning. Isaiah took the wheel, speeding through intersections as police cleared paths. Malik stared out the window. His thoughts drifted to Jaden again. He hadn't texted. It was probably nothing. Jaden was responsible, but something crawled beneath Malik's ribs, an old instinct he didn't trust anymore. When Lena was dying, he'd had the same feeling weeks before her diagnosis. A kind of buzzing just beneath the skin, like the body knowing something before the mind could name it. The smoke appeared before the building did, black and angry, curling upward into the cloudless sky. The industrial district was half abandoned, a sprawl of rusted warehouses and tagged train cars. The air reeked of burning plastic and gasoline. Fire engines and ambulances flanked the perimeter, and a line of onlookers gathered behind makeshift barricades. Malik stepped out of the van and adjusted his earpiece. The camera was already rolling. He nodded to Isaiah and turned to face the lens. "We're live at the scene of what appears to be a major industrial fire on Chicago's south side. Behind me, crews are battling a blaze that began roughly 30 minutes ago in a long-abandoned textile warehouse." He spoke calmly, analytically. Years of training kicked in. He delivered the facts, paused for visuals, referenced city records. And then, as he moved along the barrier for a better angle, something caught his eye. A small object lay half submerged in the muddy water by the curb, burnt around the edges. He leaned down. It was a spiral notebook, half melted, scrawled across the front in black ink, almost illegible now. "Jaden, J." Malik froze. He stared at the notebook, his hand hovering just above it. Behind him, sirens wailed. Firefighters shouted over walkie-talkies. He didn't hear any of it. The world had narrowed to that name on soaked paper. He stood up slowly, eyes scanning the chaos. His breath caught. Near the collapsed wall of the warehouse, a fireman emerged carrying what looked like a piece of burnt fabric. Malik stepped forward. 3 steps, then 5, ignoring the camera following him. The jacket. It was Jaden's, the same one Malik had bought him last Christmas, custom embroidery on the sleeve. There was no mistaking it. He felt the world tip sideways. The camera was still rolling. Viewers across the city, across the country, watched as Malik James, the face they trusted, the man who had told them hard truths, suddenly clutched a piece of fabric to his chest and whispered a name they couldn't hear. Jaden. His knees buckled. He dropped to the pavement. The broadcast cut to static. But it was too late. The truth was already out. The silence that followed the broadcast blackout felt louder than the sirens. Malik knelt on the pavement, the half-burnt jacket still clutched in his trembling hands, its scorched fibers biting into his skin. All around him the scene pulsed with urgency. Shouting firefighters, the screech of hose valves, the acrid haze curling through the wind. But none of it registered. His mind had locked onto a single possibility, a truth he had no words for, a reality he would have given anything to deny. The jacket was Jaden's. There was no question. Isaiah reached for Malik's shoulder, gently pulling him back. Malik, we need to move. The chief's asking for clearance near the south wall. It's not stable. But Malik didn't move. His eyes scanned the flames, the smoke, the blur of orange uniforms. He's in there, he said, more to himself than anyone. He's in there, Isaiah. Isaiah hesitated. Rosa stood just behind him, her face pale. You're sure? She whispered. Malik nodded, not taking his eyes off the wreckage. A battalion chief approached, face smeared with soot and frustration. You're the reporter who just broke protocol and ran the barrier? He barked. Malik stood slowly, the jacket limp in his grip. My son, he said, his voice raw. Jaden James. He's 16. I found his notebook, his jacket. He was here. The chief's expression changed instantly. He glanced toward a group of medics tending to a line of stretchers. Names not on our evac list yet, but we've got 4 confirmed pulled out. 2 conscious, 2 critical. Still checking for others. I want to see them, Malik said. The chief hesitated again, then gestured toward a tent hastily erected behind a fire truck. Malik moved without waiting, his breath tight in his chest. Inside the triage area, 2 teenagers sat wrapped in thermal blankets, oxygen masks strapped to their faces. Malik scanned their faces. Neither was Jaden. One of them looked up as Malik entered and seemed to recognize him. He fumbled with his mask, coughing. He went in after Michael, the boy rasped. Said he heard him calling. We tried to stop him. Malik crouched in front of him. Jaden? He went back in? The boy nodded, coughing again. There was a wall collapse. We couldn't find him. Malik's stomach turned to ice. An EMT placed a hand on his shoulder. Sir, I need you to leave this area. We'll keep you informed. Informed? Malik's voice cracked. That's my child in there. I don't need to be informed. I need him out. Rosa appeared beside him, eyes wide with fear. The broadcast's been picked up nationally. People saw everything. CBS pulled the feed, but it's everywhere now. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. He didn't care. The rest of the world could burn down beside the warehouse for all he cared. His son was inside, maybe trapped, maybe unconscious, maybe... He couldn't finish the thought. He turned back toward the wreckage, storming past the barricades again. Jaden, he shouted into the smoke. Jaden, it's Dad. Hold on, son. I'm here. Firefighters yelled, tried to restrain him, but Malik broke free, running towards the southern side of the structure where half the roof had already caved in. Another firefighter tackled him before he could cross into the danger zone, dragging him back as Malik fought, kicked, and screamed. You're going to get yourself killed, the man shouted. I don't care, Malik roared. He's in there. He's... Sir, listen to me, a second firefighter yelled, face tight with urgency. The moment we have a path, we're going in. But if you go now, we may lose both of you. Do you understand? We are not giving up. Malik stopped struggling. He collapsed to his knees again, chest heaving. Isaiah caught up, kneeling beside him. They're doing everything they can. You need to let them work." "I should have known," Malik whispered. "This morning, he lied. Said it was a school project. I didn't push him. I should have." "It's not your fault," Isaiah said. But Malik wasn't listening. He stared through the smoke, eyes searching for movement, for any flicker of hope. Then, voices, raised, urgent. A team of rescue workers emerged from the front entrance, 4 of them carrying a stretcher between them. Someone called for a medic. Another ran to assist. Malik surged to his feet, heart thudding. It was a teenager, covered in soot, face streaked with blood and ash, oxygen mask in place. The EMT was checking vitals. One of the firefighters pulled off a helmet and said something Malik couldn't hear. He pushed past Rosa, past Isaiah, past the crowd. When he got close enough to see the boy's face beneath the mask, he nearly collapsed. It was Jaden. He wasn't conscious. His left leg was twisted unnaturally. His right hand was badly burned. There were gashes on his forehead and cheek. His hoodie was shredded and blackened. Malik reached for him, stumbling to keep up with the medics rushing toward the ambulance. "That's my son," he shouted. "I'm coming with him." "Sir, we need space." "I said I'm coming with him." One look at Malik's face was enough. The EMT stepped aside. Malik climbed into the back of the ambulance and took his son's hand, careful to avoid the burns. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you, Jaden. Stay with me." The doors slammed shut. The siren wailed. The ambulance peeled off, cutting through traffic with sirens split in the air. At the hospital, everything blurred. Hallways, nurses, rapid-fire questions, paperwork, words he only half processed. Critical but stable. 3rd-degree burns. Suspected head trauma. Induced coma. He signed forms, sat in waiting rooms, paced corridors. At some point, Rosa arrived with his phone and bag. Isaiah brought coffee. He didn't remember drinking it. The doctors did what they could. After 3 hours of surgery, Malik was finally allowed into the ICU. Jaden lay beneath a blanket, tubes and wires everywhere, monitors beeping in slow, steady rhythm. His face was pale, swollen, bandages wrapped around his arms, his chest. One eye was completely shut. A ventilator helped him breathe. Malik sat down beside the bed and took his son's uninjured hand. He didn't cry. He couldn't. The grief was too large, too jagged for tears. He didn't know how long he sat there before a nurse came in. "You can stay as long as you like," she said softly. "He's stable for now." Malik nodded. He stayed all night. The next morning, when he stepped into the hospital hallway, his face unshaven and eyes bloodshot, the waiting room was filled with people. His sister, Naomi, his nephew, a few of Jaden's classmates, half the newsroom, and reporters, cameras, microphones, news vans were parked outside like vultures. He held up a hand. "Not now." One of the reporters stepped forward anyway. "Mr. James, Malik, how are you holding up?" He turned and looked the woman dead in the eye. "How would you hold up," he asked, "if you had to report your own son's death in real time?" She stepped back. Malik walked past them all and returned to the room. He sat beside Jaden and whispered stories from when he was small, from when Lena was still alive. He told him about the first time Jaden said he wanted to be a reporter. He told him about the time he tripped on stage at a school recital, but kept singing anyway. "I need you to do that again, Jaden," he said. "I need you to keep singing." Outside, the city was already turning the tragedy into a media storm. Inside, Malik waited, and Jaden slept on. Morning came with gray light filtering through the narrow blinds of the ICU window. Malik had not moved from his place at Jaden's bedside, nor had he slept. His hand rested gently on his son's wrist, just above the pulse monitor, as if his own presence alone might coax the boy back into consciousness. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor offered the only sign of life, constant and indifferent. Machines did what the body could not, breathing for Jaden, nourishing him, tracking his fragile stability. Malik's eyes were bloodshot, dry from hours of watching, hoping, fearing. When a nurse stepped in just after dawn with a clipboard and a soft, "Good morning," Malik only gave a faint nod. He could barely summon the energy to speak. She checked the vitals, adjusted the IV line, and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder before leaving without a word. He was grateful for the silence. The door creaked open again an hour later. Naomi entered, her expression grave but composed. She wore no makeup, her hair tied back in a tight bun. A social worker by trade, she was used to holding others together in moments like this. She wasn't used to doing it for her own brother. "I brought clean clothes," she said, placing a folded sweater and jeans on the chair. "And coffee. Real coffee. Not that vending machine battery acid you've been drinking." Malik blinked slowly. "Thanks." She sat beside him, hands in her lap. "You've been in here all night. I'm not leaving him. I know, but you need to eat, sleep, shower. I said I'm not leaving." She let it go. There was no point in arguing. Instead, she turned her eyes to Jaden. "The doctors said he's stable. That's something. Stable means he's still not awake. But it also means he's not getting worse." Malik leaned forward, pressing his fingers to his temples. "They told me he has burns on over 20% of his body, second and third degree. They said the smoke inhalation did damage to his lungs. There's swelling in his brain. He could be in this coma for days, weeks, months, or he might never wake up. That's what stable means." Naomi reached over and took his hand. "You're scared. I am too. But Jaden is strong." Malik didn't reply. His eyes were on his son's face, bloated, bandaged, still. It was difficult to reconcile this motionless figure with the vibrant boy who had danced around the living room just last week, teasing his father with exaggerated imitations of his news reports. "I should have pushed him harder that morning," Malik muttered. "He said he had a project. I knew he was hiding something. I let it go. I thought I was giving him space, respecting his independence, but I should have insisted." "Don't do that," Naomi said firmly. "Don't take the blame for this. I spent my whole career teaching people to question everything, to look deeper, to follow the story. He did exactly that, and it nearly killed him." She didn't argue. Instead, she stood and opened the door to let a nurse know they needed a moment. Then she came back, placing a folder on Malik's lap. "What's this?" he asked. "It's not official yet, but word got out. There were 6 kids in that building, 2 dead, 3 injured, 1 missing. Jaden was the one missing. Until yesterday, the others, they were part of something." Malik opened the folder. Inside were photos, notes, printed screenshots of text messages and social media posts. Naomi had compiled everything she could find. Names, conversations, a pattern. They called themselves Youth Watch, she said. It wasn't a school project. It was something they started on their own. They believed there was an illegal chemical storage operation happening in that warehouse. One of the kids had a brother who got sick living nearby. They decided to investigate when no one else would. Malik's throat tightened. They were just children. They were brave, and Jaden wasn't just part of it. From the looks of it, he was helping lead it. There were photos of Jaden holding a camera, directing the group, notes about late-night meetings, plans for a short documentary. They had footage, too, hidden camera angles of trucks entering and leaving the warehouse, timestamps, license plates. It wasn't just a game to them. It was real. It was methodical. Malik closed the folder and sat back. His heart hurt in a new way, pride and pain tangled together. Later that afternoon, while Jaden remained unconscious, Malik left the hospital for the first time in 24 hours. Rosa picked him up and drove him to the studio. He didn't speak much during the ride, and she didn't ask questions. She only turned the radio down and handed him her phone once. "You should see this." A video was playing, an unedited clip of Malik shouting Jaden's name through the smoke, fallen to his knees. The voiceover was from a national anchor. Veteran journalist Malik James breaks down live on air as he realizes his own son is among the victims. The clip had over 4 million views. Dozens of networks had replayed it. Social media was ablaze with reactions. Some called it the most human moment ever caught on live television. Others debated the ethics of showing it. There were memes, think pieces, hashtags, even calls for Malik to receive an award for bravery. He turned off the phone. In the studio conference room, his co-workers greeted him with a solemn hush. Even the executive producer, normally all business, approached and hugged him tightly. "We pulled the footage," she said quietly, "but it's already out. You're a national story now." "I don't care about that." "I know, but I thought you should hear it from us." He nodded. They sat. A few others entered the room. The managing editor laid out a new angle. "We've been digging into that warehouse. Turns out it was owned by a shell company linked to a regional contractor who recently got a massive city contract for chemical waste removal. They've been storing illegal materials off-site to avoid regulation. The kids were right." Malik clenched his fists. The editor continued. "You're the only one who can tell this story right now, Malik. It's your story. But I understand if it's too personal. We'll handle it however you want." He didn't respond right away. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the skyline of Chicago was dim under an overcast sky. His reflection in the glass looked 10 years older. "I'll write the first piece," he said at last. "Then I'm taking leave, until Jaden wakes up." They agreed. Back at the hospital that night, he sat by Jaden's side again and read the story aloud. It wasn't an article, it was a letter. He told the city who Jaden was. Not just a victim, a truth seeker. A kid who believed justice was worth fighting for, even when adults failed. A son who followed his father's example, even when that example was far more dangerous than it seemed. That story ran in every major outlet within days. Donations poured in to support the families of the other students. Investigations began. The mayor issued a statement. The contractors' offices were raided. But for Malik, none of that mattered unless Jaden woke up. He stayed by his side, every night, every morning, reading, talking, remembering, waiting, and Jaden slept on. The days that followed melted into one another with a slow, aching rhythm. Time lost its edges in the sterile air of the intensive care unit, where Malik sat like a statue, hour after hour, holding vigil beside his son's motionless form. The monitors pulsed in their steady, mechanical cadence, measuring breath, blood, and life. But there were no words, no flickers of movement from Jaden. Just a boy suspended in the fragile space between sleep and surrender. Malik rarely left the room. Nurses came and went with practiced quietness, checking drips and bandages, changing dressings, monitoring vitals, but he barely acknowledged them. His world had narrowed to the chair at Jaden's side and the boy in the bed. He spoke often, softly, not with desperation but with familiarity, telling stories from their life, recounting childhood memories, reading aloud articles from the paper, even reciting old bedtime stories they hadn't touched in years. He told Jaden about how he learned to ride a bike, about his first news assignment, about the day he first saw Jaden's mother across the college cafeteria and knew he'd marry her. He filled the room with the sound of life because silence, in that space, felt too much like death. On the 5th day, the hospital allowed a therapy dog to visit. A golden retriever named Samson padded gently into the room and placed his head on Malik's knee. Malik smiled for the first time in days, scratched the dog behind the ears, and said, "He always loved dogs, always begged me for one." The dog remained still, sensing the weight of grief in the room, offering what comfort it could. Each day brought the same questions from doctors. Had there been any movement, any sign of consciousness? And each day Malik gave the same answer. No, but he kept watching. He kept hoping. He kept praying, not in the performative sense, but in the quiet, aching way that fathers do when they have nothing else left to give. The hospital staff came to respect Malik not just as a father, but as a kind of living sentinel. He became part of the ward's rhythm. Nurses brought him real food from home. An orderly set up a cot in the corner of the room so he could lie down without leaving Jaden's side. Social workers checked in daily, not with questions, but with quiet updates and small reassurances. And every evening, just before the hospital quieted for the night, someone from the newsroom would stop by, Rosa, Isaiah, his producer Mira, offering news, updates, and above all, presents. On the 7th day, Mira brought a large manila envelope. "You've got mail," she said, placing it in his lap. Malik opened it slowly. Inside were dozens of letters, handwritten notes from viewers, children, teachers, fellow journalists, parents who had lost children, survivors of fires, of war, of grief, people who had seen the broadcast, read his article, and felt compelled to reach out. One note, written in shaky cursive by an elderly woman from Iowa, read, "You made me cry in my kitchen. I'm 84 years old. I've seen a lot of news in my life, but never something so human. I'm praying for your boy." Another was from a 13-year-old girl named Kiara in Detroit. "I want to be a reporter like Jaden. I didn't know kids could be that brave." And one letter, folded carefully in blue-lined notebook paper, simply said, "My dad never cared what I believed in. I hope Jaden knows you do." Malik read each one. Some he read twice. He stacked them beside Jaden's bed and said, "See, you're already changing people, even from this bed." But still, Jaden did not stir. The second week brought new complications. A mild infection flared in one of the burns. His oxygen levels dropped. Malik stood helpless as doctors surrounded the bed, issuing orders and adjusting machines. For 3 hours, the world narrowed again, to nothing but terror and sterile lights. But Jaden pulled through. The boy refused to let go. And then, on the 13th day, the hospital chaplain visited. A quiet man named Reverend McKinney, whose eyes held the weight of decades spent at bedsides like this one. "I don't come to preach," he said, sitting beside Malik. "I come to listen." Malik appreciated that. They talked for nearly an hour, not about God, not really, but about fatherhood, about Lena, about how much of himself Malik saw in Jaden, about the cruel irony of being a man who made his living telling the world stories, only to become the center of one he couldn't narrate. Reverend McKinney listened patiently, then said, "When I lost my son, I thought the grief would consume me. But the truth is, grief doesn't end. It changes. It weaves itself into who you are. But love, we carry that forward, every day, whether they're with us or not." Malik nodded, tears stinging his eyes for the first time in days. He stayed up that night rereading Jaden's messages on his phone. There weren't many. Jaden had never been overly communicative by text. But one stuck with him, sent just 2 weeks before the fire. No context, just a line. "I think you're the bravest man I know." He stared at the message until his eyes blurred. The following afternoon, a young woman appeared in the waiting room and asked for Malik. She introduced herself as Marina Perez, a high school senior who had been a part of Jaden's group. She had escaped the fire by sheer luck. She had left early that day to attend a family function. "I know I shouldn't be here," she said, "but I had to tell you. Jaden saved lives." She explained that the group had planned to meet that day to install a second set of hidden cameras inside the warehouse. They had discovered that barrels of chemical waste were being delivered in secret, stored improperly, and possibly leaking into the nearby soil. Marina had warned them not to go in that deep, but Jaden insisted. He said the footage would be useless unless they could capture proof. "When the fire started," she said, voice trembling, "he went back for Michael. He could have run, but he didn't. He stayed. He found him, dragged him toward the door. That's when the roof caved." Malik listened in silence, overcome. "Jaden believed the truth was worth the risk," she added, "because that's what you taught him." That night, Malik wrote again. Not a report, not a column, a letter, a private one. He didn't send it. He didn't publish it. He just folded it carefully and placed it beneath Jaden's pillow. The letter read, "I'm not the brave one, son. You are." On the 15th day, a tremor changed everything. It was small, so small that Malik thought he imagined it. A slight twitch of Jaden's fingers beneath his hand. He sat up, alert, heart racing. Then it happened again. A flutter, a tightening, reflexive but real. He called for a nurse. A team arrived within minutes. They checked reflexes, shined lights into Jaden's eyes, whispered commands. Jaden didn't wake, but he moved. For the first time, Malik felt hope break through the dread like a shaft of sunlight. It wasn't over. The story was still unfolding. The doctors confirmed the movement was involuntary but promising. They reduced the sedation, adjusted the monitors, told Malik to be ready, but cautiously. Recovery was a slow road. Nothing was certain. Malik nodded. He didn't need certainty. He just needed time. That night, he whispered to Jaden, "I'm not leaving. I never will. You just keep fighting." Jaden didn't answer. But this time, Malik swore he saw his eyelid flutter, and so he stayed, waiting, watching, hoping. The days of pain were not yet over, but hope had finally returned. It happened in the quiet of the early morning, before the shift change, before the lights in the hallway fully brightened and the nurses began their daily rounds. Malik was dozing in the chair beside Jaden's bed, his chin tucked against his chest, his body slouched in that strange, bone-deep exhaustion that came not just from sleeplessness, but from prolonged grief and waiting. A paperback novel rested face down on his thigh, pages slightly curled from use, though he hadn't turned a page in hours. The only sounds in the room were the gentle hiss of oxygen, the methodical beeping of monitors, and the subtle creak of leather as Malik's body shifted in restless half-sleep. Then it came. A whisper, a rustle, a sound so small it could have been nothing, a change in the rhythm of the monitor, a sigh in the air, a shift in the mattress springs. But Malik's eyes opened, alert in an instant. He had become so attuned to Jaden's presence that any deviation was like an earthquake. He straightened, rubbing his eyes, scanning the monitors. Everything looked the same. And then his gaze moved to Jaden's face. His son's eyelids were fluttering. For a moment, Malik didn't breathe. He leaned closer, afraid to speak, afraid to break whatever delicate thread was beginning to pull Jaden back to the surface of consciousness. The flutter came again, and then, slowly, laboriously, Jaden's eyes opened. They didn't focus immediately. They were glassy, confused, and heavy with the residue of sedation, but they were open, alive. "Jaden?" Malik whispered, voice cracking. "Son, can you hear me?" Jaden blinked slowly, as if each movement required enormous effort. His lips parted. A breath escaped, dry and rasping. His eyes tried to follow the sound of Malik's voice, and finally, he moved his head slightly to the side toward his father. Malik stood, gripping the bed rail, overwhelmed with emotion. "You're awake," he said, barely above a whisper. "Thank God you're awake." Jaden's lips moved again, this time with more purpose, but no sound came out. Malik leaned in closer. "It's okay. Don't try to talk. You've got a ventilator. Just rest. I'm here." A nurse rushed in moments later, alerted by the shift in vitals. She called for the ICU team, and soon the room was a blur of movement and low, urgent voices. But Malik didn't move from his spot. His hand was wrapped gently around Jaden's wrist, anchoring him, reminding him that he wasn't alone. When the nurse gently nudged Malik back to give the doctors room, he reluctantly let go, but his eyes never left his son. It took nearly 30 minutes for the team to stabilize Jaden, to assess his cognitive responsiveness, and to determine that, indeed, he was emerging. Not fully, not yet, but undeniably. A tremor of life after so many days of stillness. Later, when the room had quieted and Jaden was sedated again, lightly this time, Malik sat with his forehead pressed to the edge of the mattress, tears soaking silently into the cotton. For the first time in weeks, the fear that had clenched his heart with a steel grip began to loosen. There was a way forward now. A path, however long and painful, but a path nonetheless. Word spread quickly. Rosa arrived that afternoon, her arms full of balloons and a stack of cards from the station. Isaiah followed with a camera, not to film, but to capture what Malik called private victories. Even the hospital staff seemed different now. Smiles crept into the corners of their expressions. The tone in the hallway changed. Hope was contagious. As Jaden continued to wake over the following days, his body responded slowly. He blinked more often, tracked voices, tried to speak through cracked lips. They weaned him off the ventilator. He coughed, he cried. The first time Malik heard Jaden's voice, a hoarse, broken rasp that barely rose above a whisper, he dropped his coffee and wept openly. "Dad," Jaden croaked, barely audible. "I'm here," Malik said, gripping his hand. "You're okay. You're safe." Jaden nodded slightly, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. His body trembled with weakness, but his mind was alert. It would be a long road. The burns were healing slowly. Physical therapy was still far off, but his brain was intact. His spirit, though battered, was unbroken. In the days that followed, they spoke more, in short conversations, each word measured like gold. Jaden asked about the others, his friends. Malik answered honestly. 2 had died. 1 was still in critical condition. 2 were recovering, and 1 had visited several times already. Marina. Jaden nodded. "She told me not to go back in," he murmured one day. "But I heard Michael scream. I couldn't leave him." "You saved his life," Malik said. "You saved more than one." "I didn't want to be a hero," Jaden said quietly. "I just didn't want him to die." "You did what you had to do," Malik replied. "That's what courage is." It was around this time that Malik agreed to return briefly to the network for a special broadcast. The producers had been asking him for weeks, and he had refused every time. But now, with Jaden improving, he felt ready to speak, not as a journalist, but as a father. The segment was live. Malik sat in the familiar studio, under the lights that had once seemed so ordinary, but now everything felt different. He looked into the camera, took a breath, and began. "For the last 3 weeks, I've not sat behind this desk. I've not read headlines or interviewed experts. I've been by my son's side, watching him fight for his life. Many of you watched the moment I realized that he was inside that burning building. Many of you wrote to me, prayed for us, sent your love. I want to thank you, and I want to tell you that Jaden is awake. He is healing. He is alive." He paused, eyes glassy but steady. "But this story is not just about a father and a son. It's about a generation of young people who are willing to do what many adults won't: question power, seek truth, and act with courage. My son risked everything to expose something dangerous, not for fame, not for recognition, but because he believed it was right. And that belief almost cost him his life." The broadcast went viral. It was replayed on every major network. Commentators called it one of the most powerful monologues in recent news history. The hashtag #Jaden'sFight trended for days. Letters continued to pour in. One of them was from a U.S. senator requesting Malik's input on a new bill focused on youth safety and civic engagement. Another was from a university offering Jaden a full scholarship once he recovered. At the hospital, Jaden was slowly beginning to sit up. Physical therapists worked with him daily, helping him regain movement in his limbs, stretch his healing skin, and rebuild muscle lost during his coma. It was agonizing work. Jaden cried often, his body racked with pain, but he never stopped trying. Malik was there for every session, cheering him, lifting him, holding him when he shook with exhaustion. "You don't have to do this alone," he said one evening after Jaden had collapsed into his arms, sobbing. "You've got me. Always." Jaden clung to him. "I don't want to be strong anymore." "You don't have to be. You just have to keep going." As the weeks passed, Jaden grew stronger. He began to speak with more ease, laugh a little, even roll his eyes when Malik told corny jokes. Their bond deepened in those moments of shared silence and struggle. They were no longer just father and son. They were survivors of the same fire. In late spring, Jaden was moved from the ICU to a rehabilitation center. The new room had windows that looked out over a small garden, and for the first time in over a month, he could feel sunlight on his skin. Malik wheeled him outside one afternoon, wrapped in blankets, and they sat in silence, watching bees drift lazily from flower to flower. "I thought I'd never feel sunlight again," Jaden said, his voice soft. "I thought I'd never hear you speak again," Malik replied. Jaden turned to him. "Can we do something with all of this? I mean, everything that happened?" Malik nodded. "We already are." Later that week, Jaden recorded a short video from his hospital bed. It was shaky and quiet, but his voice was clear. "My name is Jaden James. I'm 16. I went into that warehouse to tell the truth. I almost died. But I'd do it again. Because the truth matters. We matter." The video was posted on the network's website and shared across the country. Schools played it in classrooms. Activists shared it in rallies. Parents showed it to their children. Jaden became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of resilience, of what it meant to speak out, even when the world wasn't listening. And Malik, for the first time in a long time, believed that the worst was behind them. There was still pain, still struggle, but his son was awake. And that changed everything. Spring turned to summer in a slow, sunlit stretch, the days growing longer, brighter, and warmer, as if the world itself was trying to match the gradual return of joy to the James family. It had been nearly 3 months since the fire, and Jaden, now visibly leaner but more vibrant than anyone could have imagined, was beginning to reclaim pieces of his life one hard-earned moment at a time. Though the path to recovery remained steep and riddled with pain, progress had become a daily rhythm. Each step, each flexed muscle, each breath without struggle was a triumph. For Ma, every milestone, no matter how small, felt like a celebration, a whisper from the universe that things might one day feel normal again. The rehabilitation center became a second home, a place not of grief but of quiet determination. The sterile hallways were replaced with walls covered in student art and murals painted by volunteers. Jaden's room was no longer an ICU ward surrounded by monitors and emergency carts, but a private, sunlit space with a bookshelf filled with titles from his childhood and a digital picture frame that cycled through family memories. Lena holding baby Jaden in the park, Malik and Jaden at a Cubs game, a candid shot of Jaden at 11, grinning through a mouthful of braces and holding a microphone made out of tinfoil. The mornings began with occupational therapy, followed by strength training and speech exercises. Jaden endured it all with more grit than anyone expected, though the pain was visible in his every wince, in the way his fingers sometimes curled involuntarily, in the tremble of his legs as he practiced standing. There were days when tears flowed freely, when frustration boiled over into anger, when the weight of what had happened, the scars on his body, the physical limits that hadn't existed before, threatened to drown his optimism. But Malik never left his side. He pushed when needed, pulled back when Jaden was breaking, and remained his anchor through each wave. By the end of July, Jaden was able to walk short distances with assistance. Malik was there the day he took 3 steps on his own, clutching parallel bars with trembling arms, sweat beading on his forehead. The room erupted into applause, but Jaden barely heard it. He locked eyes with his father, and Malik saw what he always believed was there: steel. Not in his muscles, not in his posture, but in his heart. At night they talked, not as patient and caregiver, not as child and parent, but as two people who had passed through fire and come out altered, bonded in pain and survival. Jaden asked hard questions. He wanted to know what had happened to Michael, to the other boys, to the city, to the warehouse. Malik answered everything he could. Michael was alive, recovering, though his injuries would also take time. The families of the 2 boys who didn't make it had started a foundation in their honor. The city had launched multiple investigations. The warehouse had been condemned and razed. The illegal chemical storage operation had been dismantled, and charges were filed against the contractor responsible. Headlines read, "Teen Heroes Expose Corruption," "Youth Truth Movement Sparks Reform," "From Tragedy, Change." But it was the smaller victories that mattered most to Jaden. He was surprised to learn that Youth Watch, the group he had co-founded with a few friends, had been resurrected by younger students and community activists. They had held rallies, written op-eds, and even partnered with local schools to launch a civic journalism initiative in Jaden's name. Malik showed him a poster someone had taped to a classroom wall, a silhouette of Jaden holding a camera with the words, "Truth has no age." In August, the mayor of Chicago paid Jaden a personal visit. She brought a certificate of recognition, praised his courage, and told him the city would be launching a permanent program to fund youth investigative projects. Jaden was polite, but subdued. After she left, he looked at Malik and said, "I don't want to be a symbol. I just wanted people to know the truth." "And they do," Malik said. "But symbols have power too. You can be both." As Jaden's strength returned, so did his passion for storytelling. Malik brought him an old laptop from the house and installed video editing software. It took time. His hands still trembled, his coordination still lacked finesse, but slowly, Jaden began to build a short documentary. It was raw, unfinished, but it told the story from his perspective. Footage from before the fire, narration he recorded sentence by sentence, and clips from news reports. The first time Malik watched it, he sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the clarity, the heart, the honesty. It was more than a film. It was a testament. Malik pitched the idea to the network, a segment featuring Jaden's journey, culminating in his own documentary. Executives jumped at the chance. But Malik set strict boundaries. No dramatization, no emotional manipulation, no invasive cameras. Jaden would have control. The network agreed. The premiere aired in early September. Malik and Jaden sat together in a private screening room at the station. Rosa, Isaiah, and the rest of the team joined. The broadcast opened with Malik's voice. "When the story becomes your own, the rules change, but the truth remains." Then Jaden's footage rolled. It was haunting and beautiful. Images of the abandoned warehouse, clips of teenagers laughing, running, investigating, followed by the aftermath. Jaden's voice narrated the whole way, clear, strong, unmistakably his. When it ended, no one spoke for a moment. Then applause. Tears, hugs. The documentary went national. Schools added it to their media literacy curricula. Teachers reached out, asking for speaking engagements. Jaden declined most, but agreed to one, the reopening of a local media center renovated by community donations. They renamed it the James Civic Journalism Lab. On the first day, Jaden wheeled himself to the podium and looked out at the crowd. "I'm not a hero," he began. "I'm just a kid who asked a question, and I got burned looking for the answer. But if I had to do it again, I would, because silence never solves anything." The audience erupted. Malik stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes full of tears. For a long time, he had seen himself as the protector, the mentor, the one passing down the torch. But now, watching his son, he realized something else entirely. The torch had been passed. Not by his design, not on his schedule, but because Jaden had earned it. Their lives slowly fell into a new pattern. Jaden continued therapy at home, adjusted to his new physical limitations, and kept editing, writing, learning. Malik returned to the evening news desk. But he was changed too. His segments were sharper now, more personal. He spoke with more compassion, more fire. He used his platform not just to report, but to uplift. One night, after finishing an episode on youth-led political reform, Malik returned home to find Jaden at the dining table, headphones on, working on another edit. Malik watched him for a moment, then sat down across from him. "You know," Malik said, "I used to think my job was the most important thing in my life." Jaden looked up. "And now?" Now I know better. My job tells stories, but you became one, and somehow you're the one telling it better than I ever could." Jaden smiled, tired but proud. "That's because I had the best teacher." They sat in silence for a while, father and son, the fire behind them, but its lessons etched forever in their hearts. They had returned to life, and the story was far from over. The anniversary arrived quietly, not with fanfare or headlines, but with the soft acknowledgement of time past and lives transformed. The city, once rattled by the fire and its aftermath, had slowly moved forward. The streets bustled again, with the familiar rhythms of buses, bike messengers, corner vendors, and school children chasing one another along sidewalks warmed by the early summer sun. News cycles had long shifted to other stories: elections, scandals, celebrity marriages. But for Malik and Jaden James, the fire was never far. It lived with them in the details: the faint stiffness in Jaden's left hand when he held a pen too long, the way Malik's voice still faltered slightly whenever he reported on youth tragedies, and in the quiet glances they exchanged, filled with memory and unspoken understanding. It had been a year. A year since Jaden walked into that warehouse armed only with a camera, curiosity, and conviction. A year since Malik, microphone in hand, found his son's jacket buried beneath ash and steel. A year since their lives cleaved into two parts, before and after. Now, Jaden stood upright, on his own. He wore a tailored black blazer, pressed slacks, and shoes he had once feared he'd never wear again. His gait wasn't perfect, but it was steady. In his right hand, he held a small notepad. In his left, a folded speech. The tremor was slight now, barely visible. Around him, rows of folding chairs were arranged in a semicircle outside the newly built Civic Center, where a crowd had gathered under a clear blue sky. There were reporters, teachers, students, city council members, neighbors, and activists. At the front of the building, a bronze plaque gleamed under the sun: the Jaden James Media Literacy and Youth Empowerment Center. It was his day. Not just for what he had survived, but for what he had inspired, and he had earned every breath of it. Malik stood to the side of the platform, watching his son with equal parts awe and disbelief. He remembered the days spent at Jaden's bedside, counting the seconds between heart monitor beeps, willing his son to breathe, to wake, to fight. He remembered those first uncertain steps, the grueling therapy sessions, the way Jaden's voice had returned one halting syllable at a time. And he remembered the moment he realized that the boy who had once looked up to him as a hero had become something greater, a leader, a symbol, not because of what had been done to him, but because of what he had chosen to do in response. Jaden approached the podium, his expression composed, his breath measured. He took in the audience with clear, confident eyes. When he spoke, his voice rang out, stronger than ever. 1 year ago today, I nearly died. There was a hush. No one moved. I was 16, and I thought the world didn't listen to kids like me. I thought we had to scream, break rules, take risks just to be noticed. So we did. And for a long time I wondered if we had made a mistake. If what we did was reckless, selfish, naive. But then I woke up in a hospital bed, and you were all there. You stayed, you watched, you believed in what we did, even when we couldn't explain it ourselves. He looked toward Malik, then toward Marina in the front row, who wiped a tear with her sleeve. We weren't trying to be brave. We were just trying to do what our city should have done: protect its people, hold those in power accountable. We never expected to be thanked, and we certainly didn't expect to be remembered, But today, I stand here because of the people who refused to look away, who refused to let what happened become just another story. There was a murmur of agreement, a collective breath held and released. This center isn't about me. It's not even about the fire. It's about giving every young person the tools to speak truth, to ask questions, to challenge the systems that fail them. Because we deserve more than just thoughts and prayers when things go wrong. We deserve to be heard before it's too late. He paused, unfolding the second page of his speech. I still have nightmares. I still carry pain. But I also carry hope. Because I know the world can change when people decide that silence is no longer an option. And if a kid with a camera can light that fire, then maybe the next kid with a notebook, or a phone, or a question can carry it further. He stepped back, and the crowd rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous. Malik clapped hardest of all, pride and love rising in his chest like a tide. He watched as Jaden descended the steps slowly, pausing only to shake hands, hug friends, and wave at the students lining the walkway. A reporter tried to ask him a question, but Jaden smiled politely and kept walking. He had already said everything he needed to say. That evening, back home in their living room, Jaden curled up on the sofa with his laptop open on his lap. Malik sat nearby reading a book, though he found himself watching his son more often than not. The house felt full again, not with noise, but with warmth, with presence, with life. Jaden closed his laptop and leaned his head back against the cushion. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there that day? He asked suddenly. Malik looked up. At the warehouse? Jaden nodded. Every day, Malik said. But I also wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there. If you hadn't done what you did. How many people would still be in danger? How long the city would have ignored the truth? Jaden thought for a moment. Sometimes I feel like there's a before and after, like I'm not the same person I was a year ago. You're not, Malik said. None of us are. Jaden turned his head toward the window where the streetlights glowed softly beneath the twilight sky. Do you miss it? He asked. Being on air every night? Malik smiled. I still go in a few nights a week, but honestly, no, not like I thought I would. Because of me? No, Malik said, because I found something bigger. Someone bigger, watching you grow into the person you are now. It's more important than any headline I've ever written. Jaden didn't reply, but his smile deepened. In the months that followed, they both continued their work. Jaden took on a mentorship role at the center, guiding young students through their first investigations, teaching them about ethics, about truth, about responsibility. He helped launch a podcast, collaborated with local schools, and eventually announced plans to study journalism at Northwestern the following fall. He was offered scholarships, interviewed by national outlets, invited to speak on panels, but he never let the attention pull him away from his core. He remained grounded, focused, intentional. Malik, meanwhile, shifted his career toward advocacy journalism. He used his platform to amplify youth voices, fight disinformation, and push for media reform. He published a book, half memoir, half manifesto, called When the Story Hits Home. It became a bestseller. Together, they co-hosted a limited docuseries called Truth in Their Hands, which followed young reporters across the country uncovering local injustices. The series was raw, emotional, and powerful. It was nominated for an Emmy, but at home, they were just father and son. They still had quiet dinners, still argued about music, still made popcorn on Fridays and watched documentaries. The world outside might have seen them as heroes, as icons, but inside their home, they were survivors, learners, believers in second chances. On the final night of summer, as Jaden packed for college, he found the letter Malik had written and placed beneath his pillow in the hospital. He reread it slowly, then folded it again, placed it in his backpack, and turned to his father. "Ready?" Malik asked. "Not really," Jaden said, laughing, "but that's okay." They loaded the car, drove in silence for a while, and then, just before reaching campus, Malik pulled over near a park. "Let's walk," he said. They stepped out and strolled beneath the trees, the air warm and golden with the setting sun. "You know," Malik said, "sometimes I still see you in that bed, hooked up to machines. I try to push it away, but it's always there." Jaden nodded. "I see it too, but I also see what came after." They walked in silence, their footsteps soft on the path. Then Malik said, "I'm proud of you, more than you'll ever know." Jaden smiled. "I know, because you showed me how to be someone worth being proud of." As they reached the car again, Malik looked at his son, not as the boy who had nearly died, but as the man who had chosen to live. A year ago, everything had burned. Now, everything bloomed. And in the quiet that followed, there was peace. There was purpose. And above all, there was light after the fire. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Watch our next video right here, and don't forget to share this one with someone who needs to see it.